Nice to see all of you tonight. Hari Om. I have had the great privilege this weekend of being with a number of interesting and powerful people. And we've talked about life coaching and yoga, how these two schools of thought might intertwine. As Sri Swami Satchidananda said in the video this evening, everything starts in the mind. Often when we think of the mind, we're thinking of the brain, and the brain is not the mind. The mind is a more subtle function. And so all of the techniques in yoga and in life coaching are working with the mind. There are a lot of different life coaches out there, but they don't seem to have the assistance of some of our yogic techniques. Now, we come to an interesting path because when I say yoga, most people say, she means hatha yoga. So I don't understand how hatha yoga deals with the mind. But the aspect of yoga that I'm referring to right now has to do with Raja Yoga. Some bhakti, some jnana yoga, some karma yoga. And I think I forgot one of the yogas. Thank you. Japa. So these are all tools. And when we get down to the essence of all of the tools, it's actually all the same thing. It's union, it's direct connection, it's awareness. Sri Swami Satchidananda, in this talk tonight that we were so blessed to hear about, was talking about the buddhi, the intellect that is able to discern, the mind that has the strength to be aware of its thoughts. But I would suggest to you that before we even work with the mind and its thoughts, we have to have some degree of awareness and building our awareness. I've often thought it was just great grace that allows us to have any amount of awareness, because so often we are in a magnetic pull toward habitual thought patterns. Have you ever noticed that? The same thought, you know better, and yet there's a magnetic pull. Every now and again, we can pull back from that magnetic pull and look at the mind and its particular spin. Once we get to that place, then we have a whole bunch of tools that we can work with. One of my favorite tools is Pratipaksha Bhavana. Now, that's a mouthful, and it's Sanskrit. I happen to love the phrase, but many of my clients look cross-eyed when I say Pratipaksha Bhavana. So I have shortened it to PB. And sometimes PB&J, just so that people will remember it. So in order to be able to develop awareness, our capacity to notice needs to be a little bit refined. Noticing is not a quality of judgment. When we're judging something, we're usually deeming it as good or bad, right or wrong. And if we slip into that kind of dualistic thinking, we can often block information. So, when we're noticing, we're outside of a judgment. We are pulling back and becoming aware of a tendency outside of judgment of how things should be, outside of evaluation. So there's a noticing capacity that's developed. Am I making sense so far?
Yes.
Okay, good. Once we get to that place of noticing, as I mentioned earlier, then we're able to apply some tools. And Pratipakshabhavana is one of those tools. Pratipakshabhavana is found in the Yoga Sutras, Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. There are many translations of Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. Sri Swami Satchidananda has a lovely, lovely translation. It's simple, and it brings the sutras, the stanzas, the teachings down to earth for us. And what Pratipakshabhavana is, it's found in book 2.33 and 2.34. It is intentionally replacing a negative thought with a positive thought. I'm sure you've heard of this idea before. But this idea that many take credit for was actually developed about 5,000 years ago. Long time ago. But again, the ability to replace a negative thought with a positive thought is preceded by awareness. One has to be aware that they're thinking a particular way. Isn't that right? Okay. So some tools to develop awareness include, as I mentioned, the ability to notice, discernment, outside of judgment. Some other tools to develop awareness include being able to identify and name a particular trait. This is a tool that I use. So for instance, some people may notice that a negative voice kicks in. Maybe the negative voice reminds them of their father, mother. It doesn't matter who it is. We're not interested in the story necessarily behind the negative voice, because that could take us hours upon hours to delve into. But what we're interested in is the tendency of the mind to go in a negative direction. So once I'm able to notice that tendency, I can prepare for it ahead of time. If I name it, and I tend to use the gremlin, some people call it the saboteur, then I'm creating some distance from it. This is the difference between believing your thoughts and realizing that you are not your thoughts. So when we realize we're not our thoughts, we can allow thoughts to come and we can allow thoughts to go without locking on, grasping, identifying, and living from any particular state. So Pratipakshabhavana was talked about a lot this weekend. We still have tomorrow to go. It was really funny because, as I mentioned, this is a wonderful class that I'm with. And typically when I say to people, when you think of yoga, do you think of hatha first? And most of the students went, and one said, what is hatha? And so it was a great shift. I had begun to think that everyone on the outside was thinking about yoga in terms of hatha yoga, the physical practices. And this lovely person didn't even know what hatha was. They had a different understanding of what yoga is. How lucky to have that experience. Also, in the Yoga Sutras, there is a sloka, a stanza about Ishwara Pranidhana, Dhanam, Dana, And Sri Swami Satchidananda referenced Ishvara Pranidhana this evening when he spoke about God. It's a lovely note. Some people balk at this notion of God. And so we get to reframe the notion of God to the light of truth within each of the religions. It doesn't matter what you call a higher power. A recognition, though, of a higher power allows you to shift and release and surrender. And this helps when we're trying to figure out what is ours to do and what is ours to let go of. A lot of people are having challenges right now letting go of things that no longer serve them. One of the questions that I find useful is when a particular thought stream is coming through my mind, and I'm noticing, my body is getting a little bit tense, my breathing is becoming more shallow. If I'm able to ask myself, is this thought useful? It takes us out of good and bad, right or wrong, should or shouldn't, and into, is it useful? Sri Swami Satchidananda would say, let nothing disturb your peace. So if we make that our highest or most high goal, we're able to use this question of, is this thought process, this train of thought, useful? Or is it disturbing my peace? Is my breath affected by this train of thought? We had in class today, someone wanted an example. And so there was an example of road rage. You might have experienced a version of this in various degrees. You're driving along the road, you're late perhaps, there is a ton of traffic. You see an opening and someone zooms by and you no longer have your opportunity to get into that lane and make your appointment, and there's a domino effect. And therefore, and then they all hate me because I've missed my appointment. I've not kept up with my commitment. So the practice there was, are you capable or willing to not decide who that person was or is? Are you able to stay outside of a story about, they're terrible, they're selfish, they're self-absorbed, whatever the story is? Staying out of that refrain and perhaps exercising some compassion. And what compassion looks like in that example is not necessarily being overly gushy. You don't have to feign a pretend interest. But what I would suggest, or what Swami Satchidananda would most likely suggest, is staying out of an idea of who that person is or what their motives are or were. All you know is that person sped up and you now have to or get to look for an alternate way to get into that flow, that traffic flow, that stream. Because what happens is, if you can imagine, you're in your car and you're already a little bit tense, maybe your shoulders are a little bit more up towards your ears, and this is before the person has not let you in. If you make up an idea of who they are, your breath will change. Your body will become more tense. The chemicals that are emitted in your body from these negative thoughts are powerful. So if for no other reason, it doesn't even have to be altruistic, but if for no other reason, for your peace of mind, I encourage all of us, me included, to stay out of a story about who that person is, what their motive is, and having an idea about what has happened. Staying neutral. That's not typically what we like to do. We typically like to pretend that we know. But staying in what I call the land of the unknown is a skill. It takes great surrender. The ego has to take a back seat. Because if I don't know what is happening, I get to be more open to a variety of possibilities rather than reacting to an imaginary negative scenario. So as you can see, this kind of brings us back to Ishwara Pranidhana. Ishwara Pranidhana, again, is from Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. And Patanjali's Yoga Sutras are most often recognized along with Raja Yoga. Raja Yoga, not Hatha Yoga, Raja Yoga. We had the great fortune of being taught integral yoga. And integral yoga is the synthesis of all the yogas. So for those of us who have a more heartfelt tendency, we have bhakti. And in that bhakti yoga, we get out of ideas, we get out of the mind and a contracted thought process. There is an expansive state with bhakti yoga. With jnana yoga, people are studying scriptures, and through their particular way of processing information, they're able to access that union through the study of scriptures. Karma yoga. We spoke of karma yoga in this life coaching and yoga class today. Karma yoga is, as Sita had mentioned, we've got some karma yogis here. Karma yoga is the state of helping, being of service, without expecting anything in return. Anything in return includes a compliment. So there's no money exchange, there's no reciprocity. I'll scratch your back if you scratch mine. It's a little different from our current culture, right? Okay. Japa yoga is something else we talked about today, because with japa yoga, you have an opportunity to hone the mind again through mantra repetition, because we can't really get to the place of shifting our consciousness until we're aware. And japa yoga is a way for us to expand our awareness. Each time we take the mind that is splattered in a whole slew of different directions, and we funnel that mind into one thought, and in this example, it would be one particular mantra, we strengthen the capacity of the mind. We strengthen the will, which is discipline. And that power is collected, and the ability to be aware is honed. So it's been a wonderful weekend. Life coaching is often asking, what is it that is holding you back? In all the different questions within life coaching, it's always about the mind. Sometimes we think it's about the emotions, but the thoughts precede the emotions. You'll notice this. I'm not talking about feelings, emotions. So if we can get if we can cultivate a state of harnessing the mind through various practices, we become more aware, more present, aware of our true nature. And our true nature is peace and happiness. One of the lovely students today asked, why are we doing this again? This is a lot of work. She didn't say this is a lot of work. I'm paraphrasing. She said, why are we doing this again? For the sake of our peace. For the sake of our happiness. Someone else asked, if we're doing things for the sake of our happiness, isn't that egotistical? And the truth of the matter is that when you interact with anyone who really is happy, who really is peaceful, it is a lovely exchange. Happy, peaceful, connected people tend to interact differently than those who are unhappy or not peaceful or unconnected. So this is not selfish at all. And I believe it was Sri Swami Satchidananda who said, if you have to be selfish about your peace. So, there were a whole slew of other things that we talked about, but I think that's the most relevant, and I've given you an awful lot. I don't want your eyes to cross. I hope this has been useful. I thank you for listening, and I look forward to meeting you all. Om Shanti.